Good morning, church. Just to make you aware of some upcoming events. Next Sunday, you'll have a different preacher on Sunday morning, but he'll still be a Williams. The Metro Church of Christ and Waterford are doing a pulpit minister swap, and I'll let you determine who's getting the better deal out of that arrangement after that moment. So next Sunday morning, my brother, Jared Williams, will be preaching here, both services. I only have to preach one service next Sunday morning. So I get to sleep in a little bit more. So it's going to be a great, great time. So we're doing that leading up to, in September on a Sunday night, we have a joint worship plan on a Sunday night that'll be held in Auburn Hills at, I think right now we're at Oakland Christian School, where we're going to have in their gym a joint worship on a Sunday night. And hopefully that'll grow to something where we can get lots of churches in the North Metro area to participate on an annual or biannual basis. So we're looking on that. Also on the 16th, on Sunday night, we're going to have a youth-led service, and my son Seth is going to preach. So get ready. That'll probably be about an 8-minute sermon. So it's going to be your favorite one of the year. So be thinking about those things that are coming up in the very near future. This morning I want to talk about an insidious epidemic. I want to talk about that which is overtaking our society. And it's began to infiltrate and to dig its heels in without even being noticed. And if I were to ask you what are the most insidious things that are slowly creeping in and destroying our culture, our society, our environment, you might think I'm going to talk about Islam. I'm not. Islam is not as much of a problem as what we're going to talk about today. Or you might think I'm going to talk about the degrading of morality. I'm not. That's a serious problem. But it's not as insidious as the problem and that which is infiltrating and taking over this epidemic in our society today. I'm going to talk about something that has probably gotten a foothold in every one of our families. And no, I don't mean TV or the news media. Something far worse. Moodiness. Now, as I talk about this today, some of you are going to be tempted to look at the person next to you. Or to elbow. Don't do that. If you struggle with this, you know it. And everybody who loves you knows it. It doesn't need to be said. Okay? Everybody knows it. Because that's the thing about moodiness. When we think about the idea of being able to conquer our moods, and we think about this from the perspective that it is indeed an epidemic, an invasion of our families, of our society, of our churches, all we have to do is look at the statistics to know that it's true. There's an organization called the Uplift Project, and these are some of their statistics that were recently put out. Depressive disorders, according to the diagnosis, affect approximately 18.8 million Americans today, which is 9.5, almost 10% of the American population. And that's just the people who are diagnosed and given prescription medication. The rate of increase of depression among children is an astounding 23%, according to a Harvard survey. Among kids. What on earth do kids have to be moody about? I mean, think about it. I know there's some who grow up in very difficult environments. But I promise you, there's some of you who grew up in very difficult environments. I mean, you didn't have a lot to eat. Anybody eat nothing but beans for like years? You know, I mean, a few of you, if you grew up in Arkansas or Tennessee or anywhere in that part, and you grew up like near the 30s or 40s or 50s, I mean, those folks tell me all the time. I mean, almost everybody only had one pair of clothes and one pair of shoes if they were lucky. And they ate beans all the time. And they might get a little pork once every other week. I mean, that's the America of yesterday. But do you know what we didn't have in the America of yesterday where kids, they were happy to find a stick to play with? We didn't have moody kids. Because moodiness is an epidemic that's overtaking our country and our churches, and I care even more about this part, and our families. Antidepressants, according to the British Journal of Psychiatry, work for 35 to 45% of depressed population, but they've recently adjusted that, and they think it works more about 30% of the time. So even the medication that they charge billions of dollars to prescribe only works 3 out of 10 times? And then, Psychiatric Times in 2003, this is a while ago, they said that antidepressants work only as well or less well than placebos. Placebos, do you know what that is? It's a sugar pill. It's something that makes you think you're taking medicine, but you're not. Get this. The top psychiatric journal in the United States found that the drugs they give us for our moods are only as good as if we take something, only as good or less effective than if we take something for our moods that's not really a real drug and we think it is. That's a real study. I mean, it's an epidemic problem in our culture. And why do we preach about it? Why are we going to address it? Because it affects people spiritually in profound ways. So many people practice a form of surface living. They keep their emotions right underneath the surface. Life becomes a roller coaster of feeling and emotions, ups and downs and ups and downs. And existence becomes miserable for them, and the truth is sometimes miserable for everybody else around them. How do we stop the roller coaster of inconsistent lives? How do we rule our emotion instead of being ruled by them? Now, I'm going to tell you today that this is not just theoretical. This comes from my heart. You can tell I'm a little pumped up about this, because this is something I have personally battled in my life. I have found, and I'm not a psychiatrist under any measure, I've been trained some in counseling and in mental health, but this is just through observation of counseling session after counseling session, hundreds of them, thousands of them through the years. Observations in my own life and people I love. It seems that the people who struggle the most with ups and downs and depression are naturally emotional people. Now, what I mean by this is, have you ever known those guys who just aren't very emotional? Everybody know those kind of people? Have you ever known one to be depressed? Just those not emotional people. Depressed? No. Because it's tied to, you see, it's tied to how we feel. And if you haven't figured it out yet, your preacher is a pretty emotional person. It is good. Thank you, Curtis. I mean, I cry at commercials. The Latter-day Saints, I mean, I would never, ever endorse their religion, but they got some great commercials. I mean, the Mormon church, you ever watch their commercials about daddies and it's just like, I can be sitting in Lenore and say, what are you looking at on your phone? I'm watching Facebook videos and crying. I mean, that's just how I am. And so I'll tell you, through the years, when I was younger, not much anymore, because the Word of God has helped me. And I probably, when I was younger, I went and sought professional help. But I was a preacher. And I probably could have done that, but I didn't feel that I could. Because I'm supposed to help other people with their stuff. How can I go and need medication? So I didn't. So I did the only thing I knew to do. I opened up my Bible. And I listened. And it worked. Because I was willing to listen. So I want to share with you something that's been a personal conquest in my life. And I can tell you, and you can ask Lenora, it's been a victory. Not the same man as 20 years ago. Because I came to the realization about my moods. They weren't real. And how I feel is much of the time not how things are. It's a lie. And just that powerful realization is so important. You see, we have to see, first of all, that moodiness is the enemy of stability. Stability is standing on solid ground. You like to stand on solid ground? Jesus talked about the foolish man who builds his house on the sand. What's the problem with sand? Well, and I guess I really don't. I guess that must be on a beach, because we've been working at our house and we're going to put a new patio in, and the first thing they say you got to put down for firm foundation is sand. So I don't know. Sand can be solid, but usually when it's on solid, it's very good to level things, right? But only when it's on solid ground. The sand he's speaking of there is the sand of the beach, where the waves roll in and it pulls out some of the foundation. So it shifts, shifting sand. He says, but the wise man builds his house upon the rock. And right there, even though Jesus is not referring specifically to emotions and moods, he is talking about the principle that is overriding, it overshadows this as a reality that, you know what, your life needs to be built upon something solid. And people are building their lives on how they feel. I mean, goodness gracious. Lenore and I met in Portland, Oregon when we were going to college. The sun shines about 11 minutes a year in Portland, Oregon. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration. I mean, it shines very little. And you would not believe how easy it is to get depressed, especially if you're a moody person, because the sun, Seattle has the highest rate of suicide of any major city in the country. At least sunshine. But you know, people there are able to manage and work through, because it's still a feeling that has to be, you have to choose, is it going to master me or am I going to master it? Do you ever feel, those of you who struggle with your moods, do you ever just get frustrated and sit back and think that life's too short for all the unhappiness? It's too short. Are people excited to see you coming? Or are they flipping a coin and wondering what kind of day it is? You see, our goal should be stability. A consistency of being the same day by day by day. Regardless of circumstances, regardless of whether the sun's out or not, or it's raining or not, or it's snowing or not. Look at that text that was read for us. We know this text. We quote it all the time. Just the last verse, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. But do you know what the context of that text is? Context is important. That's where we look at what the original author was actually talking about, instead of just pulling something out and applying it to whatever we want. That's called proof texting. You can, by the way, if you proof text, you can make the Bible say anything, because in one place it says that Judas went and hung himself. In another place, Jesus said, go ye therefore and do likewise. Put them together. That's called proof texting. So we have to look at the context to see what was the original intent of this verse that we're latching onto. When we move back to verse 11 in Hebrews chapter 4, and it says, now that I am speaking, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned that whatever situation I am, to be content. So he says, I'm not talking about being poor, but even if I was poor, if I was in need, that's all right. I've learned to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret. Listen to that. Those of you who struggle with your moods, the Apostle Paul is going to give you and share a secret. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger and abundance and need. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Folks, I lived this because I couldn't go and get prescriptions, so I thought, because of my example and my image. And so I didn't know what to do. And then I came across Philippians chapter 4, where Paul says, I have learned to be the same, to be solid on ground, regardless of if I'm starving or if I'm filthy rich. Regardless if things are going great or if they're not. Regardless if the sun is shining or it's raining or snowing or I'm living in gloomy Portland or glorious Florida or whatever's happening in my life. I've learned the secret. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Here's what he's saying. Paul says outright in this text that Christ can give me strength. This is the passage we always read when we're going through hard times or difficulties, and that's kind of true. But it doesn't just mean we'll overcome the actual difficulty. What Paul's talking about is I've learned to overcome my moods. I've learned to overcome my moods, my attitude. And the way I've done it is through Christ who gives me strength. Well, let me tell you, this is even bigger than just applying this text as a generalization. Because to conquer your moods is to conquer your world. Because the person who has discipline and mastery over their emotions will endure, succeed, and overcome everything in life. Most people are their own worst enemy. I get so frustrated with people who blame God for things in their lives. And you know, you don't point it out when they're going through difficult times, but the reality is if you look at their lives, you're like, God didn't do this. You did. You did. But yet this roller coaster of instability leaves them in such a place of misery. You see, we trust in God's promises because He does not change. You know, the only reason we can trust God is because He's not moody. Have you ever thought of that? The only people you can really trust are the ones who aren't. Those people who are solid, that you know you can depend on, no matter what day it is. So the fact that our God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the fact that He does not change, is the very thing that makes His promises reliable. Stability gives us meaning and power for our families. It lets our kids know that mom and dad, that their advice can be relied upon, that they can be turned to in times of need. And it gives them an example of how to be for their children and their children's children. In Romans chapter 1, 16 and 17, a very familiar text again, the Apostle Paul writing says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto the salvation of all who believe, first for the Jew and then for the Gentile. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith. Some versions say from first to last. For just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. But some of your versions will say, from faith unto faith. A righteousness that is by faith, from faith unto faith. For just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And there are two ways to interpret that. Obviously, the translators who chose not to use faith unto faith and insert their interpretation, which says from first to last, they're thinking that means from the faith when you become a Christian to the faith when you die, perhaps. But it also can mean from faith to faith to faith. In other words, we don't go from good to bad to high to low. Christians live their lives on one steady, solid plank. This step is faith. The next step is faith. The next step is faith, 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 faith. From faith unto faith. Every step is solid. So this step, man, everything may be going good. But then when I step right there, some tragedies in my life. So you know what I step on now? Faith. Now things get a little better. So I step on faith. Then I lose somebody that I love. And it breaks my heart. So I step on faith. From faith unto faith. When we are consistent, you see, that allows us to become even stronger and stronger because our roots can get deeper and deeper. Can you imagine the tree, how deep its roots would be if with every wind that blew, it was uprooted a little bit and the roots had to start all over? No. Moodiness is the enemy of stability. The second thing I would like to point out is that moods can only, and I know this from personal experience, moods can only be mastered through discipline. Problems are not excuses to be moody. Maybe we need to say that one again. Problems are not excuses to be moody. Problems are not excuses to be moody. No. Moods are the result of discipline or a lack of self-discipline. You see, my mood is not necessarily how I feel. My mood is what I choose to reflect to the world. What I choose to reflect to the world. And so the reality is God will not magically change our moods. Folks, the reality of this is not, and I tell you this through 20 years of working on this, is you don't just feel better. After a long period of time you do, but I still have days. But you're not going to see it. I'm not going to let you. Sometimes I may slip, but I'm going to try not to let you. Because what I've found is that the transformation of the moods, we always talk about you got to work on yourself from the inside out. That's not true. God will work on you from the inside out. But do you know how you work on yourself? From the outside in. We use this expression, and I know we sometimes, because things become cliches, we dismiss them. But there has never been a greater truth outside of the inspired pen of New Testament writers than this. Fake it till you make it. Your moods will reflect what you decide to portray to the world. Because you will not change how you feel from the inside out. Because your source is not reliable. On the inside, that's not reliable. How you feel changes. So how can you know what that means? That means everything on the outside changes. That's a crummy day. So my life is a crummy life that day. It's a great day. So my life is wonderful that day. You see, you can't change yourself from the inside out. God will work on you from the inside out. But your responsibility is to work on yourself from the outside in. From the outside in. Elijah learned this lesson. We look back in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4. It says that he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die, and said, "Is it enough now, Lord? Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." So where's he at? He's at the place of extreme moodiness. In verses 13 and 14 of the same chapter, 1 Kings 19, it says, "So when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went and he stood in the entrance of the cave. And suddenly a voice came to him and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' So he said, 'I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because your children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life.'" So he's pouring out his moodiness on God. Now Elijah, he did have some things to be concerned about. Jezebel wanted him dead. But he also had some things to be pretty happy about. He has just left Mount Carmel, where he defeated all the prophets of Baal. But his mood, his attitude, it feels afraid. It feels rejected. It feels defeated. So what does God do to help him from this place? He does the same thing that my dad used to do. I was blessed with a good daddy. And my dad had one rule in his house, and I'm telling you, you parents, and you younger parents, I'm afraid you're not going to believe me, because y'all just don't think that some young people, I don't mean all of you, but some young people don't think that anybody before knew anything about raising kids. So now we have timeouts instead of switches. And now we have these kids in the grocery store. Instead of mom knowing how to pinch. Let me tell you, you can control a kid that quick with a pinch and a twist. Pinch and a twist. But my dad had a rule at home. No moody. This was never allowed at home. Nothing. I got a whooping. Now my dad would give me a warning. He'd say, "Son, we're not going to have everybody else's day ruined. Get out of it. Go to your room for 5 minutes. Take a moment. Get out of your mood, and I expect to see a smile on your face. But don't feel like smiling." I don't care. I don't want to see a frown. Come back out, and you better be smiling. So sometimes I'd have to be like, but you know, after a while, this became this. Because you change from the outside in. Well, Elijah has that same experience. What does the Lord do as his father? Well, look at verses 15 and 16. Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, anoint Hazael the king over Syria. And you shall anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi as king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat, and Abel Maholah you shall anoint a prophet in your place." So he says, get out of the cave and go do what I told you to do. And this isn't said, but I think it's implied. And put a smile on your face. Don't hole up in your moods. See, conquering moods requires effort. I read about a construction worker who had a stressful job. He was foreman and things were always going wrong. And he found that he was coming in and taking it out on the people he loved, and he didn't want to be that person. So he designated the tree by their front door as the trouble tree. So every day, before he'd walk in the door, he'd take and he'd just pound on that tree. And he'd just leave all of his, it's just a mental exercise where he'd leave all of his troubles there. And then he'd walk in the house with a smile on his face. Maybe you need a trouble tree. Your wife is not your trouble tree. Be clear. Your kids are not your trouble tree. Even the dog shouldn't be your trouble tree. But the whole point was he decided to take conscious action to overcome his moods. We expect, and we should expect, our children to master their moods. Don't bring that attitude in this house. Anybody's mama ever say that? Don't bring that attitude in this house. We have to set the example. Jeremiah chapter 17, 14 through 18, the greatest biblical expert on moods, Jeremiah, the moody prophet, says in Jeremiah 17, 14 through 18, "Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved. For you're my praise. Indeed, you say to me, where is the word of God? Let it come right now. As for me, I have not hurried away from being a shepherd who follows you, nor have I desired this woeful day. You know what came out of my lips. It was right there before you. Do not be a terror to me. You are the hope in the day of doom. Let me be ashamed. Let them who be ashamed who persecute me, but do not let me be put to shame. Let them be dismayed, but do not let me be dismayed. Bring on them the day of doom and destroy them with double destruction." In all of this, you can hear Jeremiah saying, Lord, I'm tempted. I'm tempted just to give in to my feelings. But Lord, help me just to rely and know that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. You see, the Lord should be our refuge from how we feel. We should trust Him even when we feel we can't. Psalm 4:1, the psalmist says, "Hear me when I call, O Lord, my righteousness, for you have relieved me. For you have relieved me when I was in distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayers." The thing about moodiness, this insidious epidemic, is it really isn't good for anybody. If you're a victim of moodiness, you're not happy. Not when you're giving into it. And nobody else around you is happy. Why do we give into it? I think because people don't realize it's something that can be mastered. Now, if you need to take the pills and that helps you, good. Or the placebos and that helps you, that's fine. But you need to take responsibility for your moods, regardless of what medication may or may not make a difference. You need to take responsibility for your moods. And realize I can be the master of how I feel through His help. If I'll choose it. I can be a better wife to my husband who has to deal with my moods. I can be more solid than I am because I love Him and I love the Lord and I love myself. I can be better for my wife because I love her and I love the Lord and I love myself. I can be better at work. I can be better with my kids, with my family. This morning, if you right now are suffering with the roller coaster of moodiness, decide to make a change. I'm living testimony. It can be done. Come right now as we stand and as we sing.